Senator, what do you think of some of these picks? Would they pass muster with you?
We've had a Democrat at the helm at the Treasury for 4 years anyway, so I'm not sure that'll make much difference. If the standard is whether or not you spend money like a drunken sailor, we've been doing that anyway. So I'm not sure that Yellen can be much worse. But I would say that with regard to foreign policy,
there
will be
Steve Mnuchin. You're not a fan of his leadership of the Treasury.
I see him as trying to shovel money out the door and just give away free money to people. And that's not a conservative notion. That's a Democrat notion. And I think he is a Democrat.
He did it with the blessing of the president, right? He wouldn't do anything the president didn't want him to do.
My comments directed specifically towards him and his negotiations with Pelosi. But I would say that on foreign policy, I am very worried about that there will be a big shift. And it's back to those who believe that we should militarily intervene abroad in a big way. You have neoconservatives on the right who want to intervene for geopolitical reasons, but then you have liberals like Blinken and Samantha Powers and others who want to intervene for humanitarian reasons, but nevertheless, they want to send our armies and our young men and women around the world. And I think Blinken's a bad choice. I'm going to ask him if he's going to apologize for his support of the Iraq War and what lessons he learned from it, whether he still believes regime change in the Middle East is a good idea, which it was not a good idea. It was not a good idea in Libya either, or in Syria. And I don't think Biden or Blinken have really fully understood that. And I actually do think President Trump really did get that regime change in the Middle East hasn't made us stronger.
Senator, John Kerry is going to be like a climate change czar, envoy. I don't know how you describe it, but it comes with cabinet level status. And I'm just wondering, does it also come with it approval in the United States Senate?
I'm not really in favor of czars or aristocracy, so I hope we don't call it czar. I think they were calling him envoy in the paper today. I think it's worth having a discussion about climate change.
Senate approval? Do you know if it needs Senate approval? Because I'm showing my ignorance here. I don't know if it does.
I know the Constitution doesn't refer to czar, so I don't know. On some of the envoys, they do have to be approved and some don't. So I think a lot of the special envoys don't have to be approved. Like when you send them to certain nations, they're not approved. So I'm not sure if it will be or won't be. But the main thing is we shouldn't have anybody directing policy, or creating rules we have to live by who's not been elected or approved by the Senate. So really, most things that involve legislation or legislative ideas that are being put forward, they really need to be legislation and not done by individuals.
Senator, as you know, the GSA has given the go-ahead here to get the transition process going. That probably could not have happened without Donald Trump's blessing, which seems to be greasing the skids for Joe Biden and a Biden presidency beginning on January 20th. You had said that the vast majority of voting, though, must still be done in person to mitigate the potential for fraud in the future. So are you saying here that the issues the president raised were legitimate and they did tip the election in Joe Biden's favor, and that the president was robbed of victory because of it?
I think if we put our heads in the sand and say, oh, no big deal, this was like any other election, we're not being honest and we're not being good at poring over the details to get to the truth. In every election we've ever held in this country, really literally every election, 99% of the votes or more have been cast in person. They're pretty easy to verify that the person showing up is voting. You have a Republican and Democrat sitting at the desk. No one can sort of stuff the ballot, or it's much more difficult to do. When they're written and sent in, there is much more potential for fraud. I'm concerned about what Professor Williams has looked at, Professor Miller from Williams College has looked at, where they did a random sampling of 2,600 Republicans. And what they found is that a significant percentage of them said they did not request a ballot, and yet somebody counted a vote for them. And another significant percentage said they did request a vote, they did vote, but their vote was counted for someone else. So I think there is something that has to be looked at, because if you extrapolate his numbers, he says as much as 100,000 ballots could have been counted incorrectly, either through fraud or error, and that ought to be looked at. We had millions of ballots. We've never had millions of absentee ballots, and it is a mistake just to slough over this. I don't know what the conclusion would be, but I think people who say there's no evidence there are being biased in the sense that they don't want to look to see if there is evidence there.
So some of your colleagues who were pressing, including Chris Christie and others who have been saying, it's time to move on, Mr. President. Are you in their camp, or do you think you should still fight this?
I'm in the camp, if we push this under the rug, we'll never know about this election, but we also will in the future have elections just like this where the lack of legitimacy will trouble half of the country or more. I'm worried about the election January 5th in Georgia. I think that you have to see, now they're saying we can't even check absentee votes because they throw away all the envelopes. I think they're saying that in Pennsylvania and Michigan. So they've separated evidence of whether the vote is valid by throwing away the contents. If it doesn't have a postmark on it, how did it get there? That would make you question that it came from somebody's lockbox or somebody's storage unit. But if there's no postmark or signature, the signature's apparently on another document. So if we can't check all of those things, how can we check for the validity of things? It's why we need to have in-person voting. You can have early voting, but it needs to be in person. Look, when I voted here in Bowling Green, we had a big, huge gymnasium. I was in there for 3 minutes. Everybody in the country is going into someplace for 3 minutes or more. There is no risk to doing it in person. I fear that we're transforming the election to something that will be very hard to police for fraud, both this time and in the future.
Real quickly, Senator, I had the pleasure to talk to you and your wife last week. We were talking about the initial attack on you guys leaving the White House last weekend. It was on the heels of an attack a lot of Trump supporters over the weekend, a couple of weekends ago. Now I come to learn that you're relaying that a U.S. attorney is not going to investigate who might have funded these protesters who confronted you and your wife. How do you feel about that?
You know, I think that if our cities are going to be livable, if you want people to travel to our nation's capital, you have to make them safe. If the people throwing firecrackers in there, people coming into the restaurant and taking your food are not punished, then who will want to travel? Right now, they've said we can't eat inside because of the virus, and we can't eat outside because of the rioters. But yes, they have to have law and order. They have to arrest these people. But I think they should check the finances. And what disturbed me most when I spoke to the assistant U.S. attorney in D.C. yesterday was that basically she said there was not going to be any investigation pursuit of the people who attacked my wife and I. And I asked specifically, did you look at their finances to see who was paying for their trip to Washington and who was paying for them to stay in fancy hotels? And she wouldn't indicate whether there was an investigation or not. She just said nothing was being pursued at the moment. So this does trouble me, and I think it leads to more chaos. And many people online have responded, look, if you're not even going to investigate people attacking a senator, what about ordinary citizens? Do they care at all? Do they care that anybody goes to restaurants anymore? Our big cities have to have law and order or they're going to be ruined.
All right, Senator, we'll see what happens. Hopefully something does to address this, but it looks like an uphill battle now. Rand Paul, thank you. Have a safe Thanksgiving, sir.